Welcome to It's Gonna Be a Good Day. My name is Ann White. I am your host, and I am so privileged to be here with Beth Kelly. She is the president of West Wildlife Rehab, and she is just such an amazing person. I'm glad we got a chance to have a few minutes with you, Beth. You do so much, but right now I want to focus on something that was tragic, a travesty, but it turned out to have a wonderful ending because of the work you and a lot of your colleagues in rehabilitation. People have never heard of fur farms or fur and urine farms, but tell us about the condition of the foxes and the skunks that were in this farm.
And long story short, there was a fur farm in Ashtabula County, Ohio, which is as far north as you can go in Ohio. And it was called Grand River Fur Exchange. And there were hundreds of animals. The conditions were horrific. The local government in Ashtabula County they did not know what to do with these hundreds of animals. Many were already dead or dying, but there were still hundreds that needed rescue, and they didn't really have the wherewithal to deal. I mean, you can't take foxes and coyotes and wild boars and wolves and put them in the county shelter. So they contacted the Humane Society of the United States. And they got involved and sent a team to the site right away. And as part of the rescue operation, they contacted OWRA, the Ohio Wildlife Rehabilitators Association, as well as ODNR, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And that's how we got involved. That's how all of the rehabbers who took animals from the Ashtabula Fur Farm were contacted individually and asked if they could help.
And there were probably over 200 animals. Is that correct?
There were 330 that were rescued. Unbelievable. You know, I'm just a little rehabber here in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I just take care of baby squirrels and bunnies and possums. I had never seen anything like this. Never. And so the animals were housed in these long barns with no access to natural light, absolutely no stimulation.
So these foxes never got to walk on earth or ground.
Never. Born in a cage, lived in the cage their entire lives. I brought back 4 foxes. My subcommittee, Anna, and I were there together, and we brought back 2 pairs of foxes. I wanted to bring back as many animals as I possibly could. And it started out with my friend Gwen saying, can you take a fox? Can you take a couple foxes? And I said, yes, absolutely. And then she started telling me about skunks, how many skunks needed rescue. And I said, you know what? Let me talk to my team. So we brought back 4 foxes, 2 pairs. And so if you follow me, you know Seth and Sadie and Finn and Fern. And they were in cages together that were, I don't even think they were 3 feet wide. It's amazing to me that any of these animals survived. They had no access to light. They had crappy food. But the mental torture is what really hit home for me.
Right. And who are you rehabbing from this? I know you have Seth and Sadie. Did the skunks stay with you, or did they go on somewhere?
No. So we still have 2 skunks in care. So I brought back 4 foxes and 10 skunks. I have about 12 active subs, and 8 of them took skunks. 2 of my subcommittees, Selena and Verdi, actually became so bonded with their skunks that they applied to ODNR and got their education permits so they can keep them. They don't keep them as pets. They don't have free access to their home. They have appropriate enclosures to live in. They do handle them regularly. They give them attention. They give them affection, but they're education animals. So whenever we do education events, they bring their skunks along, and their skunks are absolutely precious. Those are the only 2 skunks that we kept. The other 9 skunks, 2 of them are still with us. Peanut and Tidbit are still with us, and we believe they have placement. But my goodness, is there a lot of red tape in getting these animals to the facilities that are taking them. And then all of the other skunks have been placed at zoos around the country.
And that's what I want to talk about. So you've got Seth and Sadie?
And I still have Seth and Sadie with me. Yes, Finn and Fern left 2 weeks ago, and they are in Attleboro, Massachusetts.
So let's talk about, you've got these 2 foxes who have never even seen the light of day, never had
Right.
any opportunity to touch the ground. What's it like from day one to start rehabbing them, letting them know that it's going to be okay? What's their journey?
Yeah. And you know what is probably the most touching thing about all of this after what we saw and after what we saw these animals go through? Their willingness have anything to do with anybody is really pretty amazing. So when they first arrived, I kept them inside in really small crates for a couple of days, and then I transferred them to outdoor enclosures. When they first arrived, they were very, very fearful, just mostly just hid and cowered. They're just so broken, really, in so many ways. They've never displayed aggression. Fear, definitely. They were very fearful. And in spite of it being January and there was a foot of snow on the ground, I went out into that enclosure with all four foxes because I at first I had Seth and Sadie in one enclosure and I had Finn and Fern in another. And I went out and worked with them every single day, regardless of the weather, just sitting with them, just spending time with them so they would see that I didn't mean them harm. And that kind of progressed after a week or so to me taking treats in and giving them treats. They all came around pretty quickly and were all pretty willing to take treats from me.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say there's been a lot of progress past them being willing to let me hand feed them. They still will not let me pet them. They don't want to be handled. With Finn and Fern, the pair of foxes, Finn was a silver and Fern is a marble. And when we took them to get their spay and neuter surgeries, just containing them was really traumatic for them. With Fern, she was so timid that you could just pick her up and put her in a crate. The males got more aggressive, and when you were trying to actually physically handle them, they would try to bite. So getting him confined into a crate to be transported to a vet really made him lose some trust in me. So when they came back from their spay and neuter surgeries, they were inside for a while. When they had recovered enough to go back outside, they were not willing to take food from me anymore. That was that. But they eventually went to Jackson, Ohio, where my sub Anna has property and has a beautiful enclosure. And she started working with them again and got them both to come around to where they would approach her for food. Mm-hmm. So Seth and Sadie is the little dark colored pearl fox. She's very social and really confident, and she will climb on me for food. She will definitely take hand feeding. Seth, on the other hand, again, when they went for their spay and neuter surgery, I was able to just pick up Sadie and put her in a crate. Seth was not down with that. And I had to use a catch pole on him mm-hmm. to get him into a crate. And it was really upsetting to him. So I lost a lot of trust with him. This was in February. Right. So here we are in June. And he's now starting to become willing to approach me for food again, but is still very fearful.
And I want to say to anyone who would like to follow this journey, I know I came across you on Facebook. So it's West Wildlife Rehab. Is Facebook the best place to learn about the journey and the rehab?
I'm the most active on Facebook.
But then I've been watching how it looks like Seth is coming along. Now, when you're on Facebook, there's all of these people who become experts. And one of the things that I saw people asking, when are you going to release them to the wild? They're wild animals. What's your response to that? How do you talk?
Yeah, and that's a fair thing.
Uh-huh.
And that's a fair question.
Right?
Right. Well, I mean, when people who had been following us up until January, we were just rehab. I do have an opossum that's non-releasable, Monty, who has a huge following. And he, I think people understand more about him. But I got a lot of negative feedback saying, why are you hand feeding foxes? Why are you trying to train foxes? So Seth and Sadie were both, they have no wild fox in them. They're both specific color morphs that you can buy from, if you're that kind of person who does that kind of thing, from an exotic breeder. Finn is a silver fox, and Fern is a marble fox. Those are both species of red foxes, but they have been bred for specific colors. So they're not wild. They've never been wild. of cage in their entire lives. They were
They probably
probably
have no
born in a
wild
cage.
instincts.
They really don't. And people have said to me, why are you feeding them mice? Why are you feeding them quail? Why? Because those are really healthy things for a red fox to be eating. They do have quite a few wild instincts. They do a lot of things that wild foxes do, which is true of all domestic foxes. So, when people go to buy a fox and they think, well, it's a canid, it's just going to be like a dog. Foxes are nothing like dogs. There's no such thing in America as a domesticated fox. So when people go to a domestic or an exotic breeder who breeds foxes, they think they're getting a fox that's, many generations having been bred in captivity. They still have those wild behaviors. And, for instance, Seth and Sadie, who are still with me, when I take treats out for them, they'll eat a few, but when they're finished, they'll take them from me and cache them all over the cage. Sometimes they'll urinate and defecate on them because wild foxes do that. So even though they're domestic foxes and probably are from several generations of domestic foxes, they do still have wild behaviors, but that doesn't mean that they can survive in the wild. They do have some wild instincts, but I don't think that they would survive in the wild. They don't know how to hunt. They're not very nimble. And they also are not wild. And given that they have been selectively bred, that can weaken the wild fox gene pool. We don't want a pure white, Fern is a pure white fox with a little bit of dark coloring around her face. We don't want her breeding with a wild red fox. We don't want foxes that look like that in the wild. They would be at huge risk of predation and human interference. So none of these animals can be released. And it's also the law. It is illegal to release a domestic fox in Ohio. So this is Finn and Fern. Finn is the one in the front. He's the male. He's a silver fox. And behind him is Fern. And she's the female, and she is a marble fox. And they are now at Capron Park Zoo in Attleboro, Massachusetts. They were together in a tiny little cage. That they were in a cage that was the same size as foxes that were singletons that were on their own. And if you spend any time with foxes, they are really active animals, and they're really not very sedentary, especially in the evenings. And I just can't imagine day in and day out what their lives must have been like, how horrible it had to be.
And these two are doing pretty well now with your friend, right? Your sub.
Well, so they were with my sub, Anna. So first they were with me, and then Anna took them, I believe, in March. But then they came back to me because I was the one who had to get them prepared for transport. So to New York. Yeah, New York. So yeah, so they're there. I haven't had an update on them, but they were delightful.
And then this is one of your posters that I saw.
Yeah, I can't remember who did that one. We did a t-shirt contest to raise funds for the care of these animals because this was not rehab. This wasn't typical rehab that we typically will have funds for, and we need our rehab funds for our rehab patients that are releasable. So this was not the contest winner. It was just another entry, but this has Finn and Fern on it, and the skunk up there is Cletus. Yeah. Cletus, he just was, when he was taken in for his neuter surgery, his teeth were so rotten. All of these animals have broken, worn down teeth, probably from trying to chew their way out of those wire boxes. But that's Tofu. Tofu just went to Texas last week.
She's a pretty color. Now, could be natural, or is that just bred to be that color?
He was bred to be that way. Yeah. Yeah.
And then is this Cletus?
That's Stinkerbell. She is with my sub permittee, Selena. And she's one of our education animals now. So Stinkerbell and Cordelia, who is also an albino skunk. When we do education events, they come along and they're adorable and sweet, and people can pet them and interact with them. And they're wonderful.
What's her life like now?
Yeah. So Stinkerbell and Cordelia are two skunks from the fur farm that were kept. They both live in play pens. Skunks don't climb. Apparently some skunks can climb, but none of our skunks climb. thankfully. So when we first got them, we really did not want to keep them in just typical, the kind of cages that we would keep squirrels or opossums in.
Mhm.
Because, what that was at the forefront of our mind was we don't want these animals to feel contained. We want them to have room to walk around, room to play. We want them to have toys and lots of enrichment and lots of stimulation. Tinkerbell lives in a playpen, gets lots of outside time. We did purchase an outdoor enclosure for her, so she can spend time during the daytime on nice days in an outdoor enclosure. Um, they have an excellent diet. They get a wide variety of food. They get the staple is dog food. They get lots of fruit, lots of vegetables. They get insects. They get mealworms. They have toys, and they get to travel with us and interact with people.
Oh, and this is your boy, right?
This is Caleb. He is not from the fur farm,
Oh,
but
okay. I got him confused with Seth.
it looks a lot like Seth, although Seth's color morph is a Dakota Gold. Caleb is also non-releasable, but he will most likely be staying with me as an ambassador. Caleb is the offspring of a domestic silver fox. A friend of mine who rehabs in central Ohio, someone in New Concord, Ohio, released two silver foxes that they probably bought from an exotic breeder, probably
Mhm.
paid a ton of money for. And as so often happens, they realized that you really can't have a fox in your house. You really don't want a fox in your house and released them. And this happens all the time. I get calls every single year for people saying, I saw this fox. It doesn't look like a wild fox. Rehabbers are picking up the slack because exotic breeders are selling animals to people and not educating them about how difficult it is to own a pet fox, how bad they smell, how destructive they are, how impossible it is to housebreak them. They can't be housebroken. And if anybody tells you they can, they're just lying. They're lying. It can't be done. So Caleb's mother was a silver fox that was released into the wild. Someone shot her partner, the male, and my friend Nicole helped trap the mother. And then she discovered she had 5 kits that were about 6 weeks old, trapped the kits as well. And so these kits are probably the offspring of a silver fox and a wild red fox. But given that they are part domestic fox, it's illegal to release them. So he is not releasable. So I am training him to be my ambassador and having a new enclosure built just for him. And I spend a lot of time bonding with him, and it's going really well.
And I think I saw him playing on a trampoline today.
He was playing on a Yeah,
okay.
He has a trampoline. He has a wheel. He won't get on the wheel, but he's absolutely precious. But it's a ton of work bonding with him and training him. But I really am hopeful that I'll get him to the point that I can take him to public events. So
let's talk
and teach
about
people.
That.
But it's not up to the rehabber to decide which animal can be an ambassador or a program animal. It's up to ODNR. So it's not my decision whether or not to keep a non-releasable animal. And ODNR, to my knowledge, has never required anybody to put down a non-releasable animal, but that is an option.
This would be a good time, Beth, to let the public know what it takes legally. Let's go legally first to be a rehabber. So it's not a do-it-yourself kind of thing. There's a lot of people that had to jump through.
I mean, I think a lot of rehabbers start that way. They find an animal, and those people don't know that, in Ohio at least, and I think it's probably this way everywhere. I don't know, but it's illegal to be in possession of a wild animal for more than 48 hours if you don't have a permit. So if you want to be a rehabber in Ohio, you have to take an 8-hour class, an introduction to wildlife rehab. And then after you do that, you establish a facility in your home. You find a vet that will work with you and sign paperwork saying this is the plan that I have to work with this rehabilitator if they need my assistance. They're called cooperating vets. If you are going to work with rabies vector species, you probably want to be vaccinated, which is really expensive. And so there's a lot involved. And then you fill out an application once you have your facility set up and you have a cooperating vet to work with you. and you fill out an application, which you submit to the Department of Natural Resources. And then a wildlife officer or a game warden comes to your facility, to your home, and
Mhm.
inspects your facility. And then they give the thumbs up or the thumbs down, depending on what they see, to ODNR. And then ODNR issues your permit. When you first get your permit, the first permit that you can get is called a Category 1 permit. And that enables you to legally intake squirrels, bunnies, and opossums, and any kind of small rodent, any kind of
Mhm.
squirrel, ground or tree, possums, bunnies, mice, voles, moles, things like that. In order to rehab rabies vector species, so it's illegal to rehab coyote in Ohio, but foxes, raccoons, bats, what are the other rabies vector species? Raccoons, foxes, bats, and skunks are the four that
Mhm.
we can legally rehab. You have to have 3 years of experience with your Category 1 permit, and then you have to have your coursework for rabies vector species animals, which is another 8-hour class.
Right.
Um,
Well, and so that's the legal part. Now I'm getting to the part of you get little bottle babies, you call them. What happens when you get a whole, would you say litter or a bunch of little bottle babies? What's a bottle baby and what happens to your life then?
oh, man, I'm not doing as many bottle babies anymore because I'm going to be 62 this year and I have really severe arthritis in my hands, and it's getting physically harder to feed them. But when you just this past spring, I took in so many mama possums who had been hit by cars. And, one had 12 babies in her pouch and she died. She didn't survive. But her babies were alive. And I had another mother with 12 babies in for several weeks. And what I ended up doing was removing her babies, and they were only 18 grams. So they were a little over half an ounce. So still super, super tiny. But the babies from the mama who had passed away were only 9 and 10 grams. Not very viable. It's really, really difficult to keep baby possums that small alive. So it was extremely difficult. I cried while I was doing it, but I removed the babies from one mama's pouch, the bigger babies, and I finished raising them. And I took the smaller babies from the mama who had died and put them in the pouch of the mama whose babies I removed. And she raised those babies and was released with those babies. The babies that I removed from her pouch had to be fed every 2 hours and at least once, usually twice overnight. And it was 12 babies. It was a lot of work.
Because when I
It
was
was a
thinking every
lot.
2 hours, I was thinking by the time you got the 12 done, it's probably
Oh, it,
time to get back to the
it
first.
was, I met myself coming and going, and that's really common. So, with neonates like that, neonate squirrels, neonate possums that are less than an ounce, it's a very intensive feeding schedule. It's a huge commitment. When older babies come in, it's a little bit easier. West has taken over my whole life, and pretty much every room in my house has got something in it that's related to rehab.
So one of the things you release most of your animals to the wild. How does that happen? How does it feel? Tell us about
Yeah,
the release.
it's
Most of your
wonderful. It's bittersweet. It's very bittersweet because, I've been doing this now for going on 9 years, and it's always a celebration, but there's always this little part of you that says, "Oh, what happens if they don't do well? I'll never know." And I mean, my followers express that all the time. Like, how can you do that? And it's like, well, I do everything I know to do to prepare them to be wild. And we're very, very careful to, when you take in neonates, squirrels, possums, bunnies, in my experience, cottontails, as soon as their eyes open, they hate you and they're afraid of you.
Mhm.
So they're an easy release. And it's also, we know that when we release them, we've been feeding them what they're going to eat in the wild all along. It's
Mhm.
really easy to go out and pick clover and dandelion greens and plantain and native greens. That's what they eat. So as long as they're appropriately fearful and they're big enough, we know that when we release bunnies, they're probably going to be just fine. When you take in newborn squirrels, newborn opossums, newborn raccoons, they do bond with you. Squirrels, they grow up really slowly. Baby squirrels, gray squirrels don't open their eyes until they're 5 weeks old. And during that time, when they're newborns, you're feeding them every 2 to 3 hours. And then once they're about 30 grams, once they weigh about an ounce, then you go to every 4 hours. But you're holding them all the time, and they come to recognize your smell. When you open up the enclosure and you pick one up, they're happy to see you. It's very touching and it's very sweet and it's really lovely. But once they open their eyes, they're still really tiny and they're still getting fed every 4 hours. And as they get bigger, you feed them less, so you handle them less. But really, when you've had something literally since it was 15 grams, the size of your pinky finger, it is bonded with you. So the time when they start to wean, we start to wean them at about 8 weeks. We're cutting back on the feeds. We're not holding them to feed them. We're feeding them through the bars of the cage. By the time they're 10 or 11 weeks old, they're weaned and we're not interacting with them really, except to open up the cage and put food in it. When they're 11 weeks old or so, they go outside to pre-release. And again, we're not interacting with them at all. And they do start to wild up and they start to become fearful. And that's the case with squirrels. It's the case with opossums. Raccoons are really difficult because they really bond hard and they are so social that it is really a challenge. Because when we release our animals, our intention is to have them be fearful of us, other humans, dogs, and cats, and to avoid people because that's what's going to help them survive. And so we really put a lot of thought and effort into not handling them unnecessarily, not talking to them, not interacting with them.
They're
So
so
that
cute, so I'm sure you feel like it, but you
it
also
is
know your goal is to let them go.
right, right. So yeah, it's really important with the species, with the animals that are releasable, to withdraw all interaction with them as soon as we possibly can.
I think
Yeah.
this has been so wonderful to shine a light on the work you do and also through you, the work that rehab people do all around the country. And
Mhm.
how wonderful it is that there are people like you who have given your life to all of these little sentient beings, from a little wee mouse to a fox to the ones that you're rehabbing and making safe. And thank you for doing what you're doing. I'm just
I love it. It's a calling. I love
yeah,
it.
I'm happy to have this time, and I'm thrilled to have found you on Facebook. So anyone who wants to just watch the behind the scenes, Beth is wonderful with educating, showing us the little feeding, showing us how they're growing. So if you want to follow any of these animals, it's West Wildlife Rehab.